If you handed me a statement today showing that you had finally reached your first $100,000, I would tell you two things at once. First, you should be proud. Second, you should be careful. Most people think six figures is the finish line. It is not. It is the point where the game finally begins acting differently. And if you misunderstand that moment, you can spend years doing the hard part only to sabotage yourself right when the machine was finally about to help you. I have spent most of my life around money, around businesses, around markets, and around the strange stories people tell themselves when numbers on paper begin changing the way they feel about life. The longer I have lived, the more convinced I have become that the first $100,000 is not mainly a financial milestone. It is a character test. It tells you whether you are going to use money as a seed or as applause. A great many people save for years, sacrifice for years, denied themselves for years, and then the moment the account finally reaches a number that feels respectable, they begin behaving as though the years of discipline were some sort of sentence they have now served. They start rewarding themselves with higher fixed costs, bigger obligations, nicer versions of things that were already doing their job, and all the little upgrades that make a person feel richer without making him any freer. That is the danger. The first $100,000 is hard because in the beginning you are carrying almost all the weight yourself. The money is too small to contribute much. You are the worker, you are the engine, you are the discipline, you are the one saying no, you are the one choosing the old car, the cheaper rent, the modest vacation, the slower wardrobe, the quieter social life, the smaller ego. In the early years, capital does not rescue you. It barely helps you. It sits there like a very lazy apprentice while you do almost all the lifting. That is why Charlie Munger used to say the first $100,000 is a terrible slog. He was right. The reason it is so painful is not only that earning and saving are hard, it is that the account balance does not yet flatter your effort. The first phase of wealth building feels unfair. You do sensible things and receive what looks like unimpressive progress in return. The public sees only the visible number. It does not see the rewiring taking place underneath. It does not see the habits being built, the preferences being clarified, the identity changing from spender to allocator. But that is what the first $100,000 is really doing. It is teaching you how to hold money without immediately turning it into lifestyle. That is why it matters so much. Not because $100,000 by itself is ultimate safety. It is not. But because it is usually the first level where the capital starts becoming heavy enough to produce visible help. If you leave it alone, that phrase matters more than people think. If you leave it alone, most people do not. They think reaching six figures means they can finally exhale into consumption. They tell themselves they have earned the right to upgrade everything. The old car now looks embarrassing. The apartment that was perfectly fine suddenly feels beneath them. The dinners become nicer. The travel becomes more performative. The monthly baseline starts creeping up. And because human beings adapt very quickly, the pleasure from the spending fades while the fixed cost remains. That is how a person can build the first $100,000 and still feel stuck years later. He did the hard work of climbing the hill and then stepped on the compounding engine right when it was finally beginning to turn. I think often about how ordinary people misunderstand what wealth is supposed to feel like. They think wealth is the ability to say yes more often. That is a shallow definition. Wealth is the ability to not panic. Wealth is the ability to absorb the car repair without the rest of the month becoming a negotiation. Wealth is the ability to leave the bad job before the bad job starts colonizing your mind. Wealth is the ability to look at a layoff, a medical bill, a market drop, or a broken appliance and respond with judgment instead of with adrenaline. That is what money is for. Optionality room. The first $100,000 gives you the possibility of that room, but it does not create the room automatically. What you do next decides whether the room grows or whether it gets sold back to the world through lifestyle inflation. I once knew a man who had done almost everything the culture says you should do if you want to be taken seriously. He worked hard, he got promoted, he moved into the kind of neighborhood that made relatives stop asking worried questions. His wife drove a new SUV. His children were in every reasonable activity. The family looked stable and prosperous from the outside, which is how most people judge such things. What they could not see was that his life had no slack in it. Every dollar had a destination before it arrived. Every month was already spoken for. When his bonus came, it did not create freedom. It repaired the pressure created by the life itself. The larger life required larger maintenance, and the larger maintenance turned his good income into a kind of treadmill that got more polished every year without getting more liberating. That is what people mean when they say someone looks rich but does not feel rich. They are observing a structure problem, not an income problem. Another man I knew earned less, lived in a smaller house than he could have justified, drove a less impressive car than he could have bought, and invested with a sort of quiet regularity that would have bored almost anyone watching him. He was not more intelligent, he was not more charming, he was not a genius. He simply refused to let his lifestyle rise at the same speed as his income. The result was that his capital got room to grow. By the time both men reached their 50s, their lives looked very different from the inside, even if the outsider still would have guessed the first man was doing better. One household required constant feeding, the other had begun producing calm. That is what you are protecting when you reach $100,000, not an ego figure and engine. So let me walk you through what I would do next if I were standing at that number today. The first thing I would do is kill any high-interest debt that still survives. This is not because I worship being debt-free in some moral or emotional sense. I do not think all debt is automatically bad. I have said many times that not all debt deserves the same treatment. A cheap fixed mortgage is not the same thing as a 22% credit card balance. A manageable student loan is not the same thing as a personal loan carrying predatory terms. If your debt is costing you 15, 20, or 25%, that debt is not a financial detail. It is a leak in the hull. A person cannot build durable wealth while paying credit card rates on the back end and dreaming about market returns on the front end. That is fantasy arithmetic. If you are paying 16% on a card, there is little wisdom in congratulating yourself for trying to earn 10% somewhere else in the market. While the guaranteed loss is sitting on the balance sheet staring at you, high-interest debt should not be managed politely. It should be eliminated. This is one of the most common confusions in personal finance. People are so eager to become investors that they try to skip the stage where they become structurally sound. They want to buy the index fund, the technology stock, the dividend payer, the little crypto speculation, all while dragging behind them expensive consumer debt like a chain they are pretending not to notice. That does not work. A bad balance sheet poisons almost every other financial decision because it narrows the mind and absorbs the future before the future arrives. So if there is ugly debt still alive, I would direct capital there first, not forever, just until the poison is gone. Then I would do the most underrated thing in all of personal finance. I would build a real emergency reserve, not a decorative reserve, not a reserve that sounds respectable in conversation. A real reserve, enough that ordinary life cannot instantly turn into bad decisions. I am not interested in living dramatically. I am not interested in making every month depend on perfect execution. I do not want a household that looks efficient from the outside and is one broken transmission away from swiping a credit card in a panic. A reserve is not an investment. That is where many people get mixed up. It is not there to outperform. It is there to protect the rest of your structure from being cannibalized every time life behaves like life. If your monthly expenses are $4,000, then you need to think in terms of 3 to 6 months of real living costs, not imaginary minimal costs. The reserve is there so that a job loss, health interruption, family emergency, or unpleasant surprise does not force you to liquidate investments at the wrong time. Borrow on stupid terms or lose all the psychological progress you just spent years building. The public underestimates the value of not having to make desperate choices. I do not. Liquidity changes the mind. A person with real cash reserves thinks differently from a person who is permanently one event away from improvisation. He does not browse jobs the same way. He does not experience market volatility the same way. He does not talk to his spouse the same way when the furnace breaks. He does not look at his employer with the same kind of trapped gratitude. Room changes behavior. That is why I like cash reserves. not because cash is exciting, because stress makes people stupid and reserves buy better thinking. Now, once the toxic debt is gone and the reserve exists, the next step is where people often overcomplicate their own lives. They reach $100,000 and suddenly decide they need a sophisticated asset allocation theory, a new identity as a stock picker, or some belief that they can now outsmart the market because they have finally become serious adults. Number for most people. The most intelligent next move is not sophistication, it is simplification. If you are building long-term wealth and you do not want to spend your life reading annual reports, living inside balance sheets, and enduring the emotional punishment that comes with concentrated positions, then a low-cost broad index fund remains one of the strongest tools ever created. I do not say this because I lack imagination. I say it because the broad American productive system has been one of the greatest compounding machines in history, and the easiest way for ordinary households to access that compounding is still broad ownership at low cost with minimal friction and maximum consistency. The public hates this answer because it is too boring. Good. Boring works. The market does not reward you for being entertained. It rewards you for staying aligned with productive assets for long enough that the arithmetic starts doing more work than your own labor can do. That is why I always return to the same thing. Low cost, broad exposure, consistency. Those four features beat an astonishing amount of ego. Now, I know what some people want to ask at this point. What about beating the market? What about the next great company? What about artificial intelligence? What about the next bull run? What about the one concentrated idea that changes everything? Fine. If a person genuinely knows businesses, has a temperament built for concentration, and enjoys the work, then yes, individual stocks can make sense for a portion of capital. But I have watched enough people confuse curiosity with competence to know that the average person is much better served by not demanding brilliance from himself where discipline would do. A broad index is not an admission of weakness. It is an admission of reality. And reality says that most investors lose far more money from bad behavior than from not being clever enough. If the goal is to turn $100,000 into $500,000 and eventually into $1 million, then the enemy is not usually a lack of hot ideas. It is self-sabotage, selling at the wrong time, chasing the wrong thing, getting distracted by narratives, trying to trade instead of own. Overestimating your circle of competence. A broad fund removes many of those traps at once. Now, if your employer offers a match through a retirement plan and you are not capturing it fully, then before you get too fancy with where the next dollars go, you fix that immediately. Free money deserves respect. A match is one of the cleanest returns available in ordinary life. And people still somehow ignore it because it lacks drama. I love free money. I always will. Every match contribution is immediate progress that no market call can improve upon. Then there is the question of tax advantage. People underestimate taxes until taxes have quietly consumed enough years that they finally notice a Roth account, a 401k, an HSA when used properly. These are not small details. They are structural advantages. Every dollar sheltered from unnecessary tax drag is a dollar with more room to compound. Compounding is already a slow teacher. Why would you voluntarily place another weight on its back? If you want real wealth, you must think not only about return but about friction. Costs matter. Taxes matter. Fees matter. Trading behavior matters. The invisible leaks matter just as much as the visible gains. So I would direct the next stage of that $100,000 through tax-advantaged channels wherever practical, then into broad, productive assets. And I would automate the whole thing. This is another place where adults complicate what should be simple. They treat investing as an activity requiring monthly courage. It should not. The more it depends on courage, the less likely it is to survive your actual life. Life is not a laboratory. People get tired, work gets annoying, children get sick, cars need tires. Marriages have moods, elections make headlines, markets fall. The person who requires constant emotional readiness to invest will eventually stop investing. I prefer systems that survive the operator. That means automatic contributions. I want the money moving before the month has a chance to negotiate against the future. I want the reserve isolated. I want the bad debt dead. I want the index purchase recurring. I want the tax advantage space respected. I want the process to continue, whether the owner feels heroic or not. That is how compounding actually gets enough uninterrupted time to matter. Now let us talk about the thing that ruins all of this for most people, lifestyle inflation. This is the hidden thief, not the market crash, not the recession, not the tax bill. Lifestyle inflation is the polite destroyer that comes disguised as reward. When a person reaches $100,000, his brain begins making an argument that sounds compassionate and is often disastrous. It says you have been so disciplined for so long, you have denied yourself, you have done the right thing while others spent freely. Surely now you can relax a little. Surely the nicer car is reasonable. Surely the bigger apartment is justified. Surely the wardrobe upgrade, the furniture, the travel, the dining, the social life, the visible signs of progress, all of that is finally in bounds because after all, you can afford it now. That last phrase should frighten you. Can afford it now. Most financial disasters are hidden inside that phrase. A person can afford a great many things right now that quietly ruin the shape of the next 20 years. The culture trains people to interpret every increase in financial capacity as permission for parallel lifestyle expansion. That is why incomes rise and stress remains. The person never captures the gap between what he earns and what he spends because every increase gets assigned a visible job before compounding ever sees it. I have always believed the strongest financial move after a milestone is to change almost nothing visible. This sounds severe to people who have never built anything substantial. It is not severe. It is intelligent. If you hit $100,000 and keep driving the same serviceable car, keep the same apartment a little longer, keep the same habits that got you there, and direct the growing surplus into productive assets, then the number starts becoming heavy enough to help you. If you hit $100,000 and immediately upgrade every category, you reset the whole process emotionally and mathematically. This is why some people remain around the same net worth for years, even while earning more. They turn the milestone into permission instead of momentum. Momentum is what you want. The first $100,000 should not be celebrated by building a bigger cage. It should be used to widen the gap between what you earn and what you require. That gap is what becomes freedom later. There is another thing I would change at this stage. I would stop thinking in months and start thinking in decades. Broke people are forced to think immediately. How do I pay this bill? How do I get through this week? How do I survive this month? That is not a moral failure. That is what scarcity does to the brain. It narrows time. But once you cross into six figures, if you are still thinking about money only in monthly emotional terms, then you are about to waste the leverage of the milestone. This is the moment to ask bigger questions. What is this money for? What life is it supposed to support? What kind of future would make the sacrifices of the last years feel intelligent? Is the real goal a home purchase? Is it career optionality? Is it early retirement? Is it a family? Is it the freedom to leave a place or a person or a job when the time comes? Is it simply not having to think about money every hour of every day? These questions matter because wealth is not the goal. Wealth is the tool. The goal is what the tool makes possible. Without that clarity, people either become hoarders with no life or spenders with no future. Both are forms of confusion. I want the person with $100,000 to become something else. An allocator with a target, a man or woman who knows exactly what this capital is meant to do and therefore can say no to everything that weakens that mission. That is where conviction comes from. Not from discipline in the abstract, from a clear picture of the life you are funding. Now, let me tell you another truth that the public resists. The habits that got you to $100,000 are almost exactly the habits that can get you to $1 million. People think the game changes. It mostly does not. The scale changes, the pressures get louder, the ads become more sophisticated, the social comparisons become more painful because your peer group now looks more polished. But the playbook remains recognizably similar. Live below your means, invest automatically, avoid unnecessary debt, keep costs low, own productive assets. Think long-term. Do not let your lifestyle rise at the speed of your earnings. That is it. That is what people do not want to hear because they were hoping success would unlock a secret second playbook with more glamour in it. There is no second playbook. There is only larger arithmetic applied to the same principles. The extraordinary thing about six figures is not that it proves you are rich. It proves you are capable. It proves that you can delay gratification long enough to build a base. It proves you can direct money instead of merely reacting to it. It proves that for at least some sustained period, you chose the future over the present often enough for the number to reflect it. That matters. Because the second $100,000 usually comes faster than the first. Not because the world suddenly becomes kinder, because the machine is finally helping. The third usually comes faster too. That is the magic people want. But the magic is conditional. It arrives only if the first $100,000 is treated like an engine, not a prize pool. This is the difference between people who build real wealth and people who remain trapped near the same number, wondering why the process somehow stopped working. The process usually did not stop. They changed the rules at the exact wrong time. So if you ask me what I would do after the first $100,000, I would give you this hierarchy: eliminate the expensive debt, build real liquidity, capture the employer match, use tax-advantaged accounts intelligently, automate broad productive investing, refuse lifestyle inflation, get clear about the future the money is meant to support. Then repeat. That is how the next $100,000 comes faster. That is how $500,000 becomes possible. That is how $1 million stops sounding like a magical event and starts sounding like a long, disciplined consequence. And if you do it correctly, the real reward is not the round number itself. The real reward is the person you become while protecting the compounding engine from yourself. That is the hidden part. The public sees the balance. I care about the identity because the account can rise and the person can still remain fragile. I want strength. A strong person with $100,000 is in a much better position than a fragile person with $300,000. The strong person can keep building. The fragile person may simply consume the difference while congratulating himself for it. So yes, celebrate the milestone. You should. Just do not misunderstand what you are celebrating. You are not celebrating arrival. You are celebrating escape velocity. The first stage is over. The machine can now begin helping. And what happens next depends entirely on whether you use that help to widen freedom or to finance a more expensive version of the same old trap.